And I think that is going to be very promising and actually and indeed necessary for us to move forward in addressing these issues.
I have so many follow-up questions to that. That was such a good response. Okay.
All right.
But I guess my biggest question to that is it always easy to source different people from different areas? I mean, to write an interdisciplinary research or study paper, you need to have multiple people coming from different angles, right? But it's not always easy to collaborate.
Correct. And that is a problem that is a problem that has been difficult to address, pretty much as you said, starting from the academic institutions. So the typical design of universities is for the Department of Ecology be separated from the Department of Sociology, different entity from the Department of History, different department from the Computer Science, different unit from the Communication Science. We need to start breaking those silos, starting within our own academic institutions, and then across intergovernmental institutions. So, for example, I do know in some countries, the Ministry of Environment does not talk to the Ministry of Agriculture, for example, or does not talk to the Ministry of Social Well-being, or the Ministry of Health. So you see all of those barriers that we have established because of the traditional way that we have operated as society in the educational component, in the educational sphere, in the governmental sphere, and so on. We need to make sure that we move that situation, move away from that situation, and work now across disciplines. And as you said, this is a difficult thing because of the cultural traditions that we have had, the typical ways of operating that we now have to break down. And we need to move into the era of multidisciplinarity. And that's a responsibility of the people in charge of the universities, and people in charge of the countries, and people in charge of international institutions such as World Health Organization, UNESCO, United Nations, and so on. We need to break all of those traditional silos and move into a much more horizontal communication and collaboration.
Right. And in a way, I guess it's also like outreach. You're trying to reach across these disciplinary fields and try to come to,
Yes.
search for a common goal. Actually, talking about on the topic of outreach, earlier in your response, you talked about how it's probably one of the hardest things that a scientist can do. But do you think education to students these days may be an easier path? Because, I mean, they're willing to learn, right? That's the job of a student. Do you think outreach to students might actually solve a lot of the problems that you're facing today in that sense?
Yes, I think so. And I really have a lot of my hope and expectation for the youth now, because, capacity to communicate, capacity to interact socially is much better now for the youth than it used to be for me when I was a young student like you. I mean, all of these communication facilities were very, very limited or non-existent. Nowadays, it is much, much easier. And also, the fact that, we have been able to communicate a little bit more extensively, more broadly, we are, via activities such as what we're doing just now, this interaction, this conversation, hopefully your efforts are going to disseminate this into other young people, and then other young people can talk to their families. And in some sense, via these efforts, gradually construct an activity in which you young people are serving as the ambassadors of the communication of all of these critical issues, using the media that we have and using the much better facilities that we have in terms of education within our schools, departments, and universities, and also through the social media as we are doing right now. So the challenge is really quite significant, it's formidable, but I think that we can appeal to the best communication, to the effective communication, to the honest communication, and to the efforts such as the one you're doing right now in this conversation.
Right. And a follow-up to that question is that I know you're involved in many science educational programs, for example, the Redwood Environmental Academy and Leadership. you're also part of the council for the K-12 science education framework. Could you talk a
Yes.
little bit about those experiences?
Right. Yeah. First of all, in terms of things related to the real program, the Redwood Academy of Leadership, what we discovered in this part of the country in the U.S. is that there are a number of underserved communities. It could be the children or families of people who migrated from other countries, and they might be at the beginning limited in language or limited in opportunities to go to the best schools, or to have opportunities to go to museums and so on, because of their particular socioeconomic situation. Well, I am targeting those communities and going to provide, share what we know, what we understand of the science in relation to the conservation of nature, in relation to the beauty and significance of science for our understanding of the world, and the enjoyment of, being exposed to nature and so on, appreciating nature. I'm trying to make all of these things accessible to communities that had not had a chance to do that because of particular socioeconomic situation. So I have this program in this city, Redwood City, in which there are communities of that nature. I have also a program, it's called STEM for Latino Girls. So this is going to middle schools in which I am targeting education for girls, because there's another component. Traditionally in our societies in the past, the education was, and the opportunities were much more centered on male persons and not so much in females. So this program actually tries to go and break that asymmetry by focusing on girls in this case. And in this case, it's girls from Latin origin, because, as I said, many families from Latin America are based now in the US and in California in particular. So those kinds of programs I do with the intention of, first of all, communicating, providing opportunity for these constituencies to appreciate the beauty of science and the significance of science for addressing the problems that we face today. So that's one of the things that I do in terms of the education. There was another component that you wanted to hear beyond that, right? Beyond the
yes, the educational framework.
Oh yeah,
that you were part of.
yeah, right. So through the National Academies of Science, this institution of the country, which has as one of the main objectives to advise society and the government about issues that have to do with science and technology, we discovered that, it's a pretty evident situation that education in science was becoming a less attractive endeavor for the younger generations than it should be. And we're focusing we discovered that the interest, motivation, and passion for the study of science education at the levels from kindergarten to 12 was not as exciting and was not as appreciated as we think it should be. And one of the things that happens we suspect that we figured that one of the reasons behind that decline in motivation and interest is the way that science is taught, is provided in education. Typically, for example, the idea of memorizing was a predominant factor in the education. Now we designed a program. We looked at a program, at a framework, actually, as to how to make the sciences more attractive to students. And so we're moving away from the memorizing, we're moving more to the understanding of the problems and addressing problems and engaging the knowledge and the pedagogical approaches to identify a problem or a fascinating aspect of the life of the planet, be that in physics or in chemistry or in biology, and seeing how that interesting phenomenon can be explained or can be investigated, or how a problem, climate change, for example, or species extinction, how can those things be examined from a scientific perspective? And so the idea of moving away from the memorizing to the more hands-on and active participation in the process of learning by doing learning via the gathering of information and then engaging in conversation and debate about the topics of interest, led us to create this new framework for science education, in which you have a number of recommendations that we are proposing for schools, initially in the US, to implement, to move away from that archaic process of education that was based essentially on memorizing. And the next phase has been to bring it to the education units or governmental education entities in the different states, for them to examine the framework and then to move to the next phase, which is the implementation. And so that is happening, I am happy to report, in many states of the US. And I think that gradually this idea is sort of percolating into the thinking and operating of the schools and the teachers. It implies a number of challenges, because many of us are used to teaching in a traditional way based on education and examination, but then after a while you notice that students learn for the day of the exam and then forgot. Now we want for this to be a much more experiential based and engaged education system that is now being implemented in the States. Our aspiration, certainly my aspiration, is that we can communicate this to other countries as well, and collectively think about to what extent this approach that we're trying to implement here, which is learning by doing, moving away from heavy memorization, to work with other constituencies, with other countries, and with other educational units of the world, to see if we can collectively create a system of science education that is going to be more attractive to the youth going forward.
Right. And of course, education is probably one of the most important ways we can get the youth to be engaged in science today. But do you think there are any other ways we can keep Gen Z and Gen Alpha aware of environmental issues, whether that be in America or all over the world?
Yes, I think so. Education in sort of in the formal sense is, as you said, one way of doing it. But I see, for example, that some media have a tremendous capacity of immersion into society. TV is one of those. Movies is another one. Celebrities is another one. That if these entities, such as TV, the media, movies, and even celebrities, engage themselves in communicating all of these. On the one hand, the fascinating aspects of the sciences, on the other hand, the significance of the sciences to address all these problems might be very, very relevant. And actually, that might play a much stronger role than we poor scientists like me trying to go to multiple elementary schools and try and convey what I have understood of the sciences and the significance of science for the calamities that we are facing today in the planet and the challenges for society, for humanity. Maybe the movies, maybe a famous sport person or an artist or an actor can actually help us to communicate all of these things. There's an interesting example. There is a famous basketball player from China who has been advocate about the ivory trade problem. And, I suspect that person, that amazing basketball player, has much more capacity to communicate and engage people than my very technical presentations, despite the fact that I try to make it as transparent as possible, as I'm hoping we're doing this conversation. But those other entities, or other elements of society can also play a significant role. There is also the situation that there's people in universities who are trained professionally to be good science communicators or good communicators in general, and those persons can actually have a better capacity than scientists like me, who is a scientist in ecology and evolution and so on, and in conservation. Those persons who are trained formally, professionally, with frameworks of pedagogy and all of those things that good educators have and good communicators have, those persons also can play a very significant role. So for people who study education, now education combined with education in science can be a very interesting career path that young people can follow and become ambassadors for society to address these problems.